Welcome back to the Grimm Workshop Trapping School. Today we're going to be setting an improvised snare using a discarded plastic bottle. Now unfortunately, garbage like this is everywhere, and no matter how far you think you're getting away, somebody was probably already there and threw something away. So any type of coastal environment you're on, especially plastic bottles like this, are pretty prevalent. Now this has a lot of survival uses. You can obviously use this as a water container. You can also make a trap with this pretty easy. But using the Cordage Card, which there's a couple different variations of, I'm going to be using the Cordage Card and any of the Grimm cards that feature a spring snare trigger. So this one is the Wayne Russell card. This just happens to be the last one I was using, so that's why I'm using it today. We're going to turn this bottle into cordage first, and then we're going to use that to set a snare. So our first step is going to be just to turn this bottle into cordage. And any of the cordage cards will work, the micro, the dog tag, or the full size. I've got the full size here today. And there is different size cordages that it makes. So you can change these spacers out using smaller, bigger. This is the standard cordage that we're going to be making. So we've got a couple videos on the channel, one on how to assemble the card, and then I've got one on there on how to use the card and an overview of the card itself. So the first thing we're going to do is just cut this bottle. If you have any questions about how to use the card, just go ahead and reference any of those videos. So once you get that top cut off, to get it started, a lot of times it's easier with a tail. So if you've got a tool with scissors on it, a multi-tool, or a Swiss Army knife, that's going to help you out. You can do it with a sharp knife. I'm going to try to catch one of these edges and just hook it into the card. I've had pretty decent luck with that too. So let's see here. And I'm just doing this by pressing down. I'm just keeping pressure. And then once I have that tail, I should be able to pull it all the way through. There we go. So I didn't quite get all of that when it broke off just a touch early, but I still got, so one arm span is 6 foot, 6, probably 11 feet, an easy 11 foot of cordage. So now that we've got that done, we're going to go ahead and secure it to our spring engine. So you can put the cordage card away. We're done with that right now. That broke off a little bit early, like I mentioned, so I've still got maybe 6 feet of cordage there. So we're going to be using the Wayne Russell card for this, and here's the two trigger components, and this is designed to work top and bottom. So one would be anchored to the ground, one would be attached to our spring engine. I'm going to be setting this up using the stake configuration just because that's how the bench is set up from the last trap that I set. So you can just watch any of the spring snare videos that I've got on the channel here, and this is going to adapt and apply to all of them. Now for the spring engine, again, all the normal spring engine selection rules are going to apply with this. And instead of attaching it through the tubing here, because this is just representing a green branch that you would find in the woods, I cut my cordage off and just made a loop. So I'm going to tie our plastic bottle cordage to this loop. So you can actually tie regular knots with this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and tie a bowline in here. So this is going to hold just fine. So here's one of the trap components off of the Wayne Russell card, and this is going to be set using the stake method, not the intended method. And again, that's just because that's how the bench was set up from my last video. And I'm going to take a little bit of cordage here off the bottom of this. Probably about 6 inches of cordage is all we're going to need. So if you're using one of the trap components that has a slightly smaller hole in it, you may have to use your scissors or use your knife or use some heat and make this a little bit smaller, because if you heat this up, it's going to shrink a little bit. So we're just going to put this through the hole. There we go. Now we're going to establish the height of our spring engine, make a loop in the line, and tie it off. So just like before, we're going to go ahead and set the height of this, and you don't want to overstress your spring engine. So about horizontal is fine. So I'm going to just mark that with my thumb. I'm going to tie a figure-8 knot. So if you don't know the figure-8, any fixed loop's going to work. So I've got my loop here. I'm just going to check the distance, and that's still pretty usable. So now I'm going to tie my trigger component into the fixed loop in the cordage. So now in the stake configuration, there's a small little step right here. Essentially, I carved an L7, and I'm going to just put that component in there. I'm going to watch my eyes, back away, and it's good to go. So I've got all this extra cordage here on the end, and that's what we're going to tie our noose into, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But essentially, when the animal pulls on it, that is a neat trick, but the plastic bottle cordage is not as flexible as regular cordage, and that works against it for a snare. So probably the best application of this would be if you had a limited amount of cordage and you used your standard cordage to make the loop and didn't quite have enough to get to your spring engine. So in that case, I would be using this plastic bottle cordage to set my snare, set it to the ground, and then off of the spring engine, I would attach my loop. But you can use bottle cordage for the entire process, including the snare loop. So to get that done, you're going to need something round to form the loop around. So this is just a piece of broken river cane off of an arrow. So any stick off the ground is going to work just fine. And I'm just going to cut a tail off of here just to show you a little bit easier. So I've got my round object I'm going to use as a mandrel. And I'm just going to tie just a double half hitch in here. The knot doesn't matter quite as much as you think it would. So there's one half hitch. There's a second half hitch. And that is not very exciting. I would not trust that in most applications to hold an animal. But what I'm going to do is fire form it. So I'm just going to touch this with the flame all the way around, and it's kind of shrinking it down. So now I'm going to slide this off. And there is our formed snare loop. So now that formed snare eye, I can send one in through and form a snare loop. So how strong is that loop that we just formed in here? I've got a bow scale right here, and we'll give it a pull and we'll see when it breaks. So that is 22 pounds, and the cordage broke, not the eye. So there's our fire formed eye, and that would hold animals straining up to 22 pounds. So that'll get you in a medium game. So I've done that test several times, and the last one I did was 21. So I'm getting a solid 20 pounds. And this is off the bottle that I'm using. So if you found garbage in the woods that has been sitting in the sun and maybe degraded, that's going to give you probably a lower number, I would assume. And the same with a regular plastic water bottle. That seems to be a little bit thinner plastic, so I wouldn't think that would hold up as well. But there's a ton of variables here, and just go out and experiment for yourself. But this is pretty impressive. You know, you're holding a 20-pound animal with cordage from a bottle, and you could carry that in your wallet. You put that in an Altoids 10 survival kit, along with a couple of cards that's got some other key items like snare locks, and you're going to be feeding yourself in the wild with garbage.